So the topic for discussion today is position of sulfonylurea in the current treatment paradigm. And well, most often nowadays, sulfonylurea is considered like a last man, and people are just waiting to see when it will get out. But you can never count down even the last man because he might be responsible for historic wins. And today's objectives are just to discuss about the options after metformin. What is wrong with sulfonylurea? Can we label or are all sulfonylureas the same? What about the modern sulfonylureas and where to position sulfonylurea? So what are our options after metformin in uptitrating treatment? So when you look at all the current guidelines like standards of care by ADA, the AAC management algorithms, or even the consensus ADA EASD guidelines, they divide patients into having established atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, DKD, or no cardiovascular disease. And you have certain group of drugs which are beneficial when you have established atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease or diabetic kidney disease. And once you don't have that, then you have to look for hypoglycemia, weight, and cost as a factor. And in that group of patients, to address this, you have to compare drugs between their convenience, their adverse effects, what about the baseline eGFR, baseline HbA1c, the duration of diabetes, age, and BMI. And based on the current guidelines, the current superstars are the SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 receptor agonists. Does that mean we have only these two drugs as the these two drugs as the only choice? Well, clinical practice differs. More and more practitioners and primary care practitioners are being asked to adopt an early aggressive treatment strategy using multiple medications. But at the same time, we should remain conscious of safety. So our dear Dr. Sanjay Kalra, the ESI president, has given us a new term, the glucodynamics, where when we employ a treatment for diabetes, it should be effective, it should protect against complications, and also the optimized therapy should be obtained at reduced and affordable cost. So what's wrong with sulfonylureas? Why are we even thinking of replacing sulfonylurea? If you look at the history, after insulin, this was one of the earliest drugs which came in the diabetes armamentarium. And in early 1950s, we had the first generation, then early 1980s, we had second generation, and now we have the modern generation or the third generation sulfonylurea. They are one of the oldest and most commonly used drugs. But what's wrong? Why do they have a bad reputation? Because they seem to, because the early studies showed that they had more propensity for hypoglycemia, weight gain, beta cell exhaustion, and cardiovascular adverse effects. But are they all the same? No, they are not all the same. If you look at the classification of sulfonylureas, whether based on generation or on hierarchy of development or on mechanism of action, we can see that they are different. And we call the modern sulfonylureas based on hierarchy of development. And the modern sulfonylureas are glimepiride and glycoside modified release or extended release and glycoside modified release. If you look at the receptor selectivity of sulfonylureas, generally, how do sulfonylureas act? The sulfonylureas bind to a sulfonylurea receptor, which is present in myocardial cells as well as the beta cell. It closes the potassium channel. That leads to an influx of calcium. That leads to exocytosis of insulin. Glimepiride binds to only the sarcolemmal sulfonylurea receptor, and it has a distinct sulfonylurea receptor binding site. So it doesn't bind like the older generation sulfonylurea like bibenflamide. Same with glycoside. Glycoside has a rapid reversible association, and it does not involve the EPAC channels and therefore doesn't cause prolonged insulin granule exocytosis. So the receptor selectivity and binding itself is different between different classes of drugs. So the modern sulfonylureas as such have a different pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic profile. What about real life practice and what about therapeutics? Well, before going on to that, you have to know that The basic advantage with using sulfonylureas is that it is efficacious. So, however, and whatever we speak about addressing comorbidities and bringing down the cardiovascular risk reduction and other risk reduction, a basic treatment of diabetes should be effective. And sulfonylurea versus placebo has shown that it can bring down HbA1c by at least 1.5%, and which is more than what is observed with most of the other oral antidiabetic drugs. The injectable antidiabetic drugs differ. They might be more, they are more efficacious. What about hypoglycemia? The earlier sulfonylureas were more prone for hypoglycemia. It is very well known: tolbutamide, chlorpheniramine, glibenclamide. But if you look at the modern sulfonylurea, on the left-hand side, you can see the chart showing comparing advanced with the other trials. You can see that when you use the sulfonylureas judiciously, the advanced intensified control arm did not have that much incidence of hypoglycemia. Advanced had the class extended release in an intensive form. If you look at other meta-analysis data, you can see that glimepiride also has a very low incidence of hypoglycemia as compared with other existing sulfonylureas. Of course, the glimepiride hypoglycemia incidence is slightly more than what is observed with metformin. And if you look at weight gain, we don't have to go for the previous study. We have the Carolina published recently, which shows that there is no significant, there is not much of a significant difference between linagliptin as compared to glimepiride. Carolina compared linagliptin, a DPP-4 inhibitor, against the sulfonylurea glimepiride, and there was no difference in between. I don't mean to say there was no difference, but the initial weight gain was not maintaining to the end of study, and glimepiride group weighed around 1.5 kg at the end of study as compared to the linagliptin arm. A lot has been spoken about beta cell exclusion. Across trials of sulfonylurea, there were trend of worsening glycemic control after the first year, and this was labeled as secondary sulfonylurea failure, and this was attributed to progressive beta cell failure. But if you look at the current advances, and you don't have to go for other trials other than Carolina, there was no end of trial HbA1c difference between glimepiride as well as the DPP-4 inhibitor, despite a mean dose of around 2.9 milligram per day. So you can see 256 weeks. So it was a long trial and long duration study, and even at the end of that, there was no, it was a glycemic equipoise study, and there was no, you cannot say that the durability was low or the beta cell exclusion is practically important. Then we cannot move forward without addressing the elephant in the room, that is the cardiovascular safety of sulfonylurea. It all started with the earlier studies, including tolbutamide, the UGDP study, which showed that people using sulfonylurea like tolbutamide had excess cardiovascular death. This made FDA make a black box warning on the packaging to indicate that cardiovascular risk might be associated with all sulfonylurea. And this led to preclinical studies and studies which showed that there is a phenomenon called as ischemic preconditioning, which is repeated and brief occlusion of the same vessel preconditions the myocardium, and it is a protective effect. And when you don't have this IPC or ischemic preconditioning, it can cause prolonged occlusion of major coronary artery. And sulfonylureas, other than glycoside extended release and glimepiride, abolish this and can cause myocardial infarction sites getting increased. Do we have data on that? Yes. Some of the human studies on ischemic preconditioning has shown that it is the older generation sulfonylureas like glibenclamide which abolishes this ischemic preconditioning. Then what about the RCTs and the meta-analysis in earlier studies? The problem was there was a disparity. Observational studies showed weak association. RCTs were underpowered, showed neutral effect, and it confused the clinician. Subsequently, when you just looked at differentiating the sulfonylurea according to generation, a systematic review and network analysis which came in Lancet a couple of years back showed that glimepiride and glycoside extended release clearly were associated with lower all-cause as well as cardiovascular mortality. You can see that on the boxes on the left side favors the sulfonylurea, the right side supports the placebo or is disfavoring the group. So the higher risk was obtained with the older generation of sulfonylureas and not modern generation. Then came the Carolina trial. We even had the advanced trial, which was not a cardiovascular outcome trial in its nature as such, but it proved that using glycoside extended release in an intensive arm seems to be favoring the reduction of cardiovascular endpoint. Then came the Carolina trial, which was a comparison between DPP-4 inhibitor linagliptin versus glimepiride. And the duration was around 6 years, nearly 6,000 participants, mean HbA1c of around 7.2%. And 42% had macrovascular disease. At the end of the study, the time to 3P MACE showed no difference between linagliptin versus glimepiride. That is, linagliptin was non-inferior to glimepiride, and glimepiride was safe when you look at DPP-4 inhibitors across 7 years in a high-risk population. Will this bring an end to the debate? My colleague, Dr. Matthew, Dr. Sanjay Kalra, and Dr. Taini Nair had recently commented on this as an opinion paper in Indian Heart Journal, which concluded looking at the evidence saying that the Carolina trial should assure and reassure the cardiologist to using sulfonylureas in stable coronary artery disease. However, the Carolina did not have adequate population in acute coronary or stroke or CVA's recent coronary events. So the interpreting or extrapolating the result into that group may not be correct. It has proven the cardiovascular safety of glimepiride as par with linagliptin, and maybe it is time for US FDA to have a relook at the black box warning. If you look at the RCTs comparing glimepiride and glycoside, which are the modern sulfonylureas, the efficacy is similar. Almost all the studies show similarity in hypoglycemia, except one where glimepiride had a higher risk of hypoglycemia, and the large observational databases have limited power to show superiority from one molecule to the other. In short, both of them are almost equal. And where will you position this modern sulfonylurea? As I said earlier, ADASD state, you look at CVD, CKD, and then you look at other factors like hypoglycemia, weight, and cost. And in case you can see that when you are looking at people without ASCVD or CKD, sulfonylurea still comes lower down on the card, and only when you think of cost that ADA or the Western authorities are recommending it. But you have to remember that definitely SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 analogs have a benefit in people with ASCVD and CKD based upon the cardiovascular outcome trials. But for example, if you just look at the people who met the eligibility criteria of inclusion into a cardiovascular outcome trial of SGLT2 as compared to diabetes general population, you will see that most of them were forming your only less than 10% of your regular practice. So if you just look at the cardiovascular outcome trials, you are going to see only less than 10% of your people who would come to your general OPD in diabetes. In 2015, the South Asian Federation of Endocrine Societies gave a consensus statement for diabetes management, type 2 diabetes management, which suggested that sulfonylurea should be considered as the agent of choice. This was taken into the Indian scenario, and they looked at all the evidence, including the economic aspect. The Indian Diabetes Management Algorithm, which is a proposal study group, also looked at the first line and second line therapies, and he has considered differentiating people into HbA1c level and consider sulfonylurea as second line agents or monotherapy when metformin intolerance is there. This is the RSSDI ESI therapeutic wheel which came recently, this consensus group statement. So in this wheel, you can see that at the center is lifestyle modification with metformin, and from there A, B, C to A to G shows individual patient factors like age, BMI, CKD, duration, established CVD, finance, and glycemic status. And everywhere you can see that sulfonylurea in all the arms form the second line of treatment. And not to forget, we have data, enough and more data, which shows that sulfonylureas are a cost-effective second-line therapy. even with the SGLT2 inhibitors and other drugs compared. So the cost is always an important factor in a population like ours. And in patients with type 2 diabetes, inadequately controlled on metformin, sulfonylureas are considered to be the most cost-effective add-on therapy. So the sulfonylureas address the glucodynamics, or it gives you confidence to treat, it is safe and it is economical. So I will wind up by concluding saying that modern sulfonylurea provides promising efficacy and safety. The evidence suggests that they are the most cost-effective second-line therapy, and they are safe from a cardiovascular perspective. And it's not time to throw them out. Still they have a role, and they, especially in a population like ours, are an efficient and safe second-line drug. Thank you.